My parents called me trash for marrying a welder until they saw what was in his workshop. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about proving them wrong. It's about discovering that sometimes the people who love you least are the ones who know you least. My name is Sarah, and I've been the family disappointment for as long as I can remember. Growing up as the younger daughter in what everyone considered a respectable middle-class family, I learned early that love came with conditions. And apparently I never met those conditions. My sister Emma was everything I wasn't. 3 years older, blonde where I was brunette, outgoing where I was quiet, and blessed with what my mother called natural grace. Emma sailed through high school as homecoming queen, graduated valedictorian, and landed a full scholarship to Northwestern. Me, I barely scraped by with B's and C's, spent my weekends working part-time jobs, and dreamed of a trade school that my parents considered beneath our family standards. I still remember my high school graduation day. While other families celebrated both their children, mine had eyes only for Emma, who was graduating summa cum laude from college the same weekend. As I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, I could see my parents in the audience. Mom was on her phone, probably coordinating Emma's graduation party, and Dad was checking his watch like he couldn't wait to get to the real celebration. After the ceremony, while Emma received congratulations and flowers, I stood alone by the gym wall, watching other families take photos. Finally, Mum approached me with what I thought was going to be a hug. Instead, she handed me the car keys. "Sarah, honey, can you drive yourself home? We need to get to Emma's ceremony. And there's only room for 3 in Dad's car for the special dinner reservation." That night, while Emma's graduation party filled our backyard with laughter and congratulations, I sat in my room, listening to the sounds of celebration that didn't include me. Through my window, I could see relatives and family friends toasting Emma's achievements. Not one person had asked about my plans or congratulated me on graduating. The pattern continued through Emma's engagement to Richard, a successful investment banker she'd met at a college alumni event. The moment she brought him home, our parents treated him like the son they'd always wanted. Richard drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, and talked about his portfolio over dinner. Dad would light up whenever Richard shared market insights, and Mom would beam as she showed off Emma's engagement ring to anyone who'd listen. Meanwhile, I'd enrolled in a technical program to become a certified welder and fabricator. When I told my parents about my career choice, the silence at the dinner table was deafening. "A welder?" Mum's voice cracked like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "Sarah, people are going to ask what our daughters do for a living. How am I supposed to say one's a successful marketing executive married to an investment banker and the other welds things?" Dad shook his head slowly. "We invested in your education, Sarah. We sent you to good schools. This is how you repay us." Emma, ever the diplomat, tried to soften the blow. "Maybe it's just a phase," she said with a patronizing smile. "Sarah's always been the creative one. Maybe she'll eventually use these skills for something more artistic." But it wasn't a phase. I loved working with metal, creating something solid and permanent with my own hands. I was good at it too. My instructors praised my precision and creativity, and I found a peace in the workshop that I'd never felt anywhere else. For the first time in my life, I was excelling at something that was entirely mine. During my training, I met Mike Rodriguez at a local fabrication shop where I was doing an internship. He was 28, had been welding for 8 years, and could create beautiful sculptures out of scrap metal that took my breath away. But what attracted me to Mike wasn't his artistic talent. It was how he listened when I talked, how he never made me feel like I needed to apologize for who I was. Mike worked long hours at the shop during the day and spent his evenings in his own workshop behind his small rental house. He'd show me projects he was working on, intricate metalwork that seemed to combine art with engineering in ways I'd never seen. When I asked him about formal training, he'd just smile and say he'd learned everything from YouTube, books, and trial and error. The best ideas come from people who aren't supposed to have them, he told me one evening as we worked side by side in his shop. Nobody expects a welder to revolutionize anything, so we get to experiment without pressure. Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared late nights in the workshop and conversations about dreams that seemed too big for our current circumstances. Mike talked about inventions he wanted to create, ways to improve manufacturing processes, and technologies that could change how people worked with metal. I'd never met anyone who thought so far beyond their current situation. When I finally brought Mike home to meet my parents, I knew it would be difficult, but I was unprepared for the level of hostility. Mum barely shook his hand during introductions, and Dad spent the entire dinner asking pointed questions about Mike's prospects and 5-year plan. When Mike mentioned he was saving money to patent some of his innovations, Dad actually laughed. Patents? Son, do you have any idea how much that costs? How much legal expertise is required? You're talking about playing in a league that requires resources you simply don't have. Mike remained polite throughout the evening, but I could see the tension in his jaw. After dinner, as we drove away from my family's house, he was quiet for a long time. Your family loves you, he finally said. They just don't understand you yet. But I was beginning to understand that love and understanding were two very different things. The real blow came 6 months later, when Mike proposed. He'd crafted the ring himself, a simple but elegant band with a small diamond he'd saved months to buy. It wasn't the massive rock that Emma sported, but it was beautiful and meaningful and entirely us. When I called to share the news, Mum's response was immediate and devastating. "Oh, Sarah, what have you done?" The engagement dinner was a disaster. While Mike tried to connect with my family by explaining his work and his goals, my parents exchanged looks across the table like they were watching a car accident in slow motion. Emma and Richard made polite conversation, but I could see Emma calculating the difference between her wedding budget and what mine would likely be. "So, Mike," Dad said during the main course, "what kind of income can Sarah expect as a welder's wife? I assume she'll want to start a family eventually, and her mother and I are concerned about financial stability." Mike's answer was honest. He was making decent money at the shop and building his side business, but we weren't going to be wealthy anytime soon. He talked about his long-term plans, his inventions, and his belief that hard work would eventually pay off. "Dreams are wonderful," Mum said with a tight smile, "but they don't pay mortgages or put children through college." After that dinner, the family gatherings became less frequent for me. Emma's wedding planning consumed every conversation, and when relatives asked about my engagement, my parents would quickly change the subject or mention it in the same breath as concerns about my life choices. The breaking point came during a family barbecue 3 months before my wedding. I was helping Mum in the kitchen when she brought up what she called practical concerns about my marriage. "It's not too late, you know," she said, while arranging vegetables on a platter. Emma has a colleague. Very nice young man. Works in finance. You could still make different choices, Sarah. I love Mike, Mom. Love isn't enough to build a life on. Look at your sister. She has love and security. Richard can provide for her in ways that your welder simply cannot. His name is Mike, and he's more than just my welder. Mum set down the knife she was using and turned to face me directly. Sarah, I'm going to be blunt because I love you. You're about to marry someone who will limit every opportunity your children might have. You're choosing a hard life when you could choose an easier one. That's not romantic, it's irresponsible. When I told Mike about the conversation that night, he held me while I cried in his workshop. We don't have to have a big wedding, he said quietly. We can go to the courthouse, just us. Start our life without all this drama. But I didn't want to hide. I wanted my family to see that Mike was worth celebrating, that our love was worth witnessing, even if they couldn't understand it yet. So we planned a small wedding with our friends and the few family members who were willing to come. My parents decided at the last minute to attend, but they sat in the back row and left immediately after the ceremony, citing prior commitments. Emma and Richard didn't come at all. Emma texted the morning of the wedding saying she had food poisoning, but I saw her Instagram post from a wine festival that same afternoon. Our wedding reception was held in Mike's workshop, decorated with string lights and his metal sculptures. It was beautiful in a way that felt authentically us, but I couldn't shake the sadness of having my immediate family essentially absent from one of the most important days of my life. After our honeymoon, a long weekend camping trip that was all we could afford, real life set in quickly. Mike continued working at the fabrication shop while spending every free moment in his workshop. I took a job at a smaller metalworking company where I could use my skills while learning more advanced techniques. The isolation from my family became more pronounced. Sunday dinners became a thing of the past. Holiday invitations stopped coming. When I called to check in, conversations were brief and awkward, usually ending with Mom asking when I was going to settle down and start a real career. The worst part was hearing about family events secondhand. Emma would post photos from dinners and celebrations that I hadn't been invited to. When I confronted Mum about it, she said they hadn't thought I'd be interested, since Mike and I were so busy with our own thing. But Mike's thing was becoming something extraordinary, even if no one in my family cared to notice. His workshop projects had evolved from artistic sculptures to functional innovations that solved real problems in metalworking and manufacturing. He'd developed a new type of joint that made welded structures stronger and more flexible. He'd created tools that made precision work faster and more accurate. And he was documenting everything, building prototypes and researching patents with the same intensity that Emma had once applied to her studies. You know, he said one evening as he showed me his latest invention, a welding system that could work in conditions previously thought impossible. I think I'm ready to take some of this to the next level. That's when David Chen re-entered my life. David had been a friend from high school, someone I'd kept in touch with sporadically through social media. He'd moved to Silicon Valley after college and built a successful tech company that specialized in manufacturing innovations. When he posted about visiting our city for a conference, I suggested meeting for coffee to catch up. During our conversation, I mentioned Mike's work. mostly just making casual conversation about how my husband was always tinkering in his workshop. David's interest was immediate and intense. "Wait," he said, leaning forward. "He's developing actual innovations, like patentable stuff?" I showed him some photos I had on my phone of Mike's recent projects. David studied them carefully, asking technical questions that I couldn't answer but promised to relay to Mike. "Sarah," David said as our coffee meeting ended, "would Mike be open to a conversation? Because what you're showing me could be exactly what my company has been looking for." That night, I told Mike about David's interest. Mike was skeptical at first. He'd been disappointed before by people who promised big things but delivered nothing. But he agreed to a phone call, which turned into a video conference, which turned into David flying back out specifically to visit Mike's workshop. David spent 4 hours in that workshop, examining Mike's innovations, asking detailed questions, and taking notes. When he finally looked up from the project Mike was explaining, his expression was one of amazement. "Mike, do you realize what you've created here? This joint system alone could revolutionize structural welding. And this precision tool, we've been trying to develop something like this for 2 years." Mike remained cautious, but I could see the hope building in his eyes. "What exactly are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need to talk about licensing agreements, patent applications, and how quickly we can get some of this technology to market. I'm thinking your workshop might have just solved some very expensive problems for a lot of people." Over the next few weeks, David and his team conducted thorough evaluations of Mike's innovations. They brought in experts, ran tests, and researched market applications. Every report came back positive. More than positive, they came back revolutionary. The patent applications alone were going to be worth millions. The licensing deals that David was negotiating would set us up financially for life. And Mike's role as the inventor and consultant would make him one of the most sought-after specialists in his field. But my family had no idea any of this was happening. As far as they knew, I was still married to just a welder who worked in a little shop and played with metal in his spare time. They had no clue that Mike's spare time projects were about to change our lives completely. I thought about telling them, about sharing the exciting developments in our lives. But then I remembered all the dismissive comments, all the excluded invitations, all the ways they'd made it clear that my choices were an embarrassment to them. Instead, I decided to wait. Let them find out the same way they'd decided I should find out about family gatherings. By accident, when it was impossible to ignore anymore. My mother's birthday was coming up in 2 months. Traditionally, it was the biggest family gathering of the year, with relatives travelling from other states to celebrate. For the past 3 years, my invitation had been either forgotten or extended so casually that it was clear my presence wasn't expected or particularly wanted. But this year was going to be different. This year I was going to show up with a gift they'd never forget. The truth about exactly who my husband really was and what our disappointing life choices had actually created. David's contracts were nearly finalised. Mike's patents were being fast-tracked. And in less than 8 weeks, everything my family thought they knew about our lives was going to change forever. The only question was whether they were ready for Sarah, the family disappointment, to become Sarah, whose husband had just solved some of the biggest challenges in modern manufacturing. Somehow I doubted it. The morning of Mum's 60th birthday party, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting the designer dress I'd bought with our first licensing payment from David's company. Mike came up behind me, straightening his new tie. Also designer, also purchased with money that would have shocked my family if they'd known where it came from. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "We could still just send a nice gift and stay home." I turned to face him, smoothing down his collar. In the past 2 months, everything had changed. David's company had fast-tracked Mike's patent applications, paying for the best intellectual property lawyers in the country. 3 of Mike's innovations were already being implemented in manufacturing plants across the Midwest. The licensing agreements had been signed just last week, with an initial payment that was more money than we'd seen in our entire lives combined. "I need them to see," I said quietly, "not because I want to prove anything, but because I want them to understand that the choices they've been judging aren't the failures they thought they were." Mike nodded, understanding in that way he always did. "And if they don't get it? If they still can't see past their own expectations? Then at least I'll know I tried." We drove to my parents' house in the new car we'd bought the week before. Not flashy, but comfortable and reliable in a way that our old Honda had never been. As we pulled into the familiar driveway, I could see the party was already in full swing. Cars lined the street, including Emma and Richard's matching luxury vehicles. Through the front windows, I could see people mingling, holding drinks, laughing. It was the kind of family gathering I'd been excluded from so many times that walking toward the front door felt surreal. Mom answered the door, her face cycling through surprise, confusion, and what looked like mild irritation before settling on polite hostess mode. "Sarah, what a surprise. I wasn't sure you were coming." "You invited me, Mom. 3 weeks ago, I texted back that we'd be here." She blinked, clearly not remembering the exchange. Of course. Come in. Mike, you look different." We walked into the living room where the party was in full swing. Relatives I hadn't seen in years turned to look at us with expressions ranging from curious to uncomfortable. Emma spotted us from across the room, her eyes widening as she took in our appearance. She whispered something to Richard, who glanced over and raised his eyebrows. "Sarah!" Aunt Linda approached us with genuine warmth. She'd always been one of the few relatives who treated me normally. "You look wonderful, honey. How have you been?" As I started to answer, Emma appeared at my elbow with Richard in tow. Sarah, Mike, so glad you could make it. Mum wasn't sure you'd be able to get the time off work." There was something in her tone, not quite condescending, but close enough that Mike's jaw tightened slightly. "We made it work," I said simply. "That's wonderful," Emma continued, her voice taking on that bright, artificial quality she used when she was being what Mom called diplomatic. "Richard just got another promotion, actually, senior vice president now. We're looking at houses in Westchester, for when we start our family." She paused, clearly waiting for me to share equivalent news about our lives. When I didn't immediately respond, she pressed on. "And how are things at the shop? Still welding?" Before I could answer, Dad's voice boomed across the room. "There's my other daughter. Sarah, come here and say hello to your Uncle Bob. He was just asking about you." Uncle Bob, Dad's brother, was a successful contractor who'd always been kind to me, though he'd expressed concerns about my career choice in the past. As we shook hands, he studied Mike with professional interest. "So, you're the welder I've heard about," he said. "Bill tells me you do good work. Always need reliable metal workers in construction. Mike nodded politely. I enjoy the craft. Been working on some new techniques lately. New techniques? Uncle Bob's interest seemed genuine. What kind of innovations? Before Mike could answer, Dad interrupted with a laugh. Bob, don't get him started on his inventions. He'll talk your ear off about patents and whatnot. The dismissive tone in Dad's voice made my cheeks burn. But Mike remained calm. Just some improvements to existing processes, he said modestly. Emma, who had been listening to the exchange with Richard, suddenly perked up. Oh, that reminds me, we have some exciting news to share. She looked around to make sure she had everyone's attention. Richard's company just closed a major deal. Show them, honey. Richard, clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight, but unable to disappoint his wife, pulled out his phone and showed pictures of a house that looked like something from a magazine. We just put an offer in on this place, he said. 6 bedrooms, pool, 3-car garage. Emma deserves the best. The room filled with congratulations and excited chatter. Mom beamed with pride. Dad clapped Richard on the back, and relatives gathered around to hear more details about the house, the neighbourhood, and Richard's latest business success. I watched it all unfold, remembering countless similar moments throughout my childhood. Emma achieving something, the family celebrating, and me standing on the periphery, trying to be happy for her while feeling invisible. But today felt different. Today, I wasn't the struggling little sister anymore. Today, I had news that would change everything they thought they knew about our lives. I was just trying to figure out how to share it when Mike's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and looked at me with raised eyebrows. It's David, he said quietly. Take it, I said. It might be important. Mike stepped toward the kitchen for privacy. But in the sudden lull in conversation that sometimes happens at parties, his voice carried clearly back to the living room. David, hey, I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. What? Already? But we weren't supposed to hear back from the second round of investors until next week. 5 million? For the licensing deal alone? The room went completely quiet. Every conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look toward the kitchen where Mike was talking, his voice growing more excited despite his obvious attempts to keep it low. And the patent applications? All 3 approved? David, this is, I can't even... Yes, Sarah's right here. We're at her mother's birthday party, actually. I could hear David's voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out his words. Whatever he was saying was making Mike laugh with pure joy. You want to talk to her? Hold on. Mike walked back into the living room, holding out his phone with the biggest smile I'd ever seen on his face. The entire party was staring at us now, their expressions ranging from confused to shocked. Sarah, Mike said, his voice shaking with excitement, David wants to congratulate you personally. I took the phone, my hands trembling slightly. David? Sarah! David's voice was so loud and enthusiastic that people near me could clearly hear both sides of the conversation. I had to call you both immediately. The investors loved Mike's innovations so much they've fast-tracked everything. We're not talking about a small licensing deal anymore. We're talking about a full partnership. $5 million up front, plus royalties that could reach 8 figures over the next decade. The words hit me like a physical force. 8 figures, Mike's workshop inventions. The projects my family had dismissed as hobbies were worth tens of millions of dollars. And that's just the beginning, David continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. MIT wants to bring Mike in as a consultant. Boeing is interested in the structural applications. Sarah, your husband isn't just an inventor. He's revolutionized 3 different aspects of modern manufacturing. The industry is calling his joint system the biggest breakthrough in structural engineering in 20 years. I looked around the room. Emma's face had gone completely white. Richard looked like he was trying to solve a complex math problem in his head. Mum was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. Dad had set down his drink and was leaning forward like he was trying to hear better. "David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "can you hold on just 1 second?" I lowered the phone and looked at my family, really looked at them. These people who had spent years making me feel like my choices were wrong, like my husband was beneath their standards, like our life was somehow less valuable than Emma and Richard's conventional success. "Mum," I said clearly, "David Chen is the CEO of Chen Industries. They specialise in manufacturing technology. Apparently, Mike's little workshop projects are going to change how buildings are constructed, how machines are manufactured, and how structural engineering is taught in universities." I raised the phone back to my ear. "David, sorry about that. Can you repeat the part about the patent valuations? I want to make sure my family hears the numbers correctly." David, bless him, seemed to understand exactly what was happening. His voice became even more enthusiastic and considerably louder. "Of course. So Mike's 3 primary patents have been valued at a combined $12 million in licensing potential over the next 5 years. That's just the conservative estimate. The welding system alone could generate $20 million in the first year if we can scale production fast enough. And the precision tools, Sarah, we already have manufacturing plants in Ohio and Texas wanting to implement them immediately." Emma made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. Richard had gone very still, his face unreadable. "And the consulting contracts?" I prompted, watching my parents' faces. "Right. MIT is offering Mike a position as visiting professor of applied engineering. The salary alone is more than most people make in 5 years. Boeing wants him to head up their new materials innovation division. We're talking about a 7-figure annual contract there. Oh, and the Pentagon has expressed interest in military applications of his joint system, like does the Pentagon. My husband, the man my father had dismissed as having no prospects, was now of interest to the United States military." "That's incredible, David," I said, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the room. "So you're saying Mike's innovations are going to change multiple industries?" "Sarah, I've been in manufacturing technology for 15 years. I've never seen anything like what Mike has created in that workshop. He's not just an inventor, he's a genius who happened to work in welding. The applications for his ideas are limitless." I could see Uncle Bob doing calculations on his fingers, trying to wrap his head around the numbers he'd just heard. Aunt Linda was looking at Mike with something close to awe. Emma was gripping Richard's arm so tightly that he was trying to subtly pull away. "Well," I said, "Mike will be thrilled to hear about MIT. He's always believed in the importance of education and innovation going hand in hand. Tell him congratulations from all of us. And Sarah, congratulations to you too. You're married to a man who's about to change the world." I hung up the phone and looked around the room. The silence was deafening. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Sarah, what exactly just happened?" Mike stepped forward, his earlier modesty replaced by quiet confidence. What happened, Bill, is that 3 years of evening and weekend work in my workshop has resulted in patents and licensing deals that will set us up for life. The joint system I developed solves a 40-year-old problem in structural engineering. The welding technology I created allows for precision work in conditions that were previously impossible, and the tools I designed cut manufacturing time in half while improving quality. "But you're a welder," Mum said weakly, as if saying it might make the phone conversation disappear. "I'm an inventor who learned welding," Mike corrected gently. "I'm a problem solver who saw ways to improve existing systems. I'm someone who believed that just because something has always been done one way doesn't mean it's the best way." Emma finally found her voice. "How much money are we talking about?" The bluntness of her question made several relatives shift uncomfortably, but I decided to answer it directly. "More than Richard makes in several years," I said simply. "More than any of us imagined possible." Emma's face went through several emotions: shock, confusion, and then something that looked very much like envy. "But Sarah, you've been so quiet about this. When did all this happen?" "It's been happening for 3 years," I said. "Every night when Mike came home from the shop and went straight to his workshop. Every weekend when he was tinkering instead of watching football or playing golf. Every time you all assumed he was wasting his time on hobbies, he was actually solving problems that million-dollar companies couldn't figure out." Richard, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Sarah, I don't understand if this is all true. Why didn't you say anything? Why let us think—" He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. Why let them think we were the struggling relatives, the family disappointment, the cautionary tale about marrying for love instead of money? "Because," I said, looking directly at my parents, "for 3 years you made it clear that our choices were wrong and our life wasn't worth celebrating. You excluded us from family gatherings because you were embarrassed by what Mike did for a living. You treated our marriage like a mistake and our dreams like foolishness." Mum's face crumpled slightly. "Sarah, we never meant—" "You meant exactly what you said," I interrupted. "And that's okay. I understand why you felt that way. But what you didn't understand is that Mike was never just a welder. He was a brilliant man who happened to work with his hands. And I was never settling for less. I was choosing a man who saw possibilities where others saw problems." Dad stepped forward, his expression shifting from shock to something that looked like remorse. "Sarah, if you had known what, Dad? That he was going to be financially successful, that his innovations would be worth millions. Would that have changed how you treated him? How you treated me?" The question hung in the air, and I could see from Dad's expression that we both knew the answer. "Because here's the thing," I continued, feeling words I'd held back for years finally finding their way out. "Mike is the same man today that he was yesterday, the same man who was kind to me when my own family wasn't. The same man who believed in his ideas when everyone else dismissed them. The same man who worked 16-hour days to build something meaningful instead of just earning a paycheck." I looked around the room at all the faces staring back at me, some shocked, some ashamed, some calculating what this news meant for their relationship with us going forward. "The only thing that's changed," I said quietly, "is that now his brilliance has a dollar value attached to it. Now his innovations have been validated by people with credentials you respect. Now his dreams have become reality in a way that's impossible to dismiss or ignore." Mike stepped up beside me, his hand finding mine. "We didn't come here to embarrass anyone," he said. "We came because Sarah wanted to celebrate her mother's birthday. Because despite everything, family matters to her." "But," I added, squeezing Mike's hand, "we won't be apologising anymore for who we are or the choices we've made. We won't be grateful for scraps of attention or acceptance based on our financial status. And we won't be pretending that the last 3 years of exclusion and dismissal didn't happen just because the circumstances have changed." Emma, who had been silent since learning about our financial situation, suddenly stepped forward. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't realise we didn't understand. What didn't you understand, Emma? That Mike was intelligent, that our marriage was built on more than financial convenience, that love and respect might actually be better foundations for a relationship than a matching income bracket." My sister's face flushed red, but she didn't back down. "We were worried about you, about your future, about whether you'd be able to support a family or have security." "Were you worried, Aisatz?" We were embarrassed." The question hit its mark. Emma looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Uncle Bob, who had been listening to the entire exchange with growing interest, suddenly spoke up. "You know what I think? I think Sarah and Mike just taught us all a lesson about assumptions, about the difference between education and intelligence, between conventional success and actual achievement." He raised his drink in our direction. "Congratulations, Mike. Not just on the money, though that's impressive, but on proving that innovation can come from anywhere. And Sarah, congratulations on seeing his potential when the rest of us were too blind to notice it." A few other relatives murmured agreement, but the core family, Mom, Dad, Emma and Richard, remained uncomfortably silent. Finally, Mum stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. We owe you both an apology. We were wrong about Mike, wrong about your choices, and wrong about what really matters." "Were you wrong, Mom? Or are you just sorry now that you know we don't need your approval anymore?" It was a harsh question, but I needed to know. I needed to understand whether this was genuine remorse or simply recalibration based on changed circumstances. Mum was quiet for a long moment. "I think," she said finally, "I was so focused on wanting security for you that I couldn't see that you had already found it. Just not in the way I expected." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. And for the first time in 3 years, it felt like my mother was actually seeing me, really seeing me, instead of just seeing her own disappointment reflected back. Dad cleared his throat. "Mike, I owe you a conversation, a real one. I'd like to understand more about what you've created, about your work, about your plans, if you're willing." Mike nodded. "I'd welcome that, Bill. I've always respected your business sense. I'd value your perspective on some of the opportunities we're considering." And just like that, the dynamic in the room shifted. Not back to the way it had been, that was impossible now, but forward to something new. Something that would have to be built carefully with different expectations and better boundaries. As the evening continued, relatives approached us with genuine curiosity about Mike's work and our future plans. Some conversations were awkward, some were heartfelt, and some were clearly motivated by the financial implications of Mike's success. But they were conversations, real ones in a way that hadn't happened in years. Emma and Richard left early, claiming they had another commitment, but not before Emma pulled me aside. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I'm happy for you. I really am. But I'm also, I don't know, confused, I guess. This changes things." "What things, Emma?" The way I think about success, about choices, about what really matters. She paused, looking out at the party. Richard makes good money, but he's not changing the world. He's not building something meaningful like Mike is. Emma, I said gently, Richard is a good man who loves you. That hasn't changed just because Mike's work turned out to be valuable. I know, she said. I spent so many years feeling sorry for you, and now I'm wondering if I should have been learning from you instead. It was the most honest thing Emma had said to me in years. As Mike and I drove home that night, we were both quiet, processing everything that had happened. So, Mike finally said, how do you feel? I thought about it carefully. Vindicated, I guess, but also sad that it took external validation for my family to see what I've always known about you. And relieved? Yeah, I admitted. Relieved that we don't have to pretend anymore, that we can just be ourselves without apologizing for it. Mike reached over and took my hand. We were always ourselves, Sarah. We just stopped waiting for permission to be proud of who we are. That night, as I lay in bed thinking about the evening, I realized that the phone call from David wasn't really the moment everything changed. The moment everything changed was 3 years ago, when I decided to marry a man my family didn't understand. When I chose love over convenience, potential over certainty, and my own judgment over other people's expectations. The money, the patents, the recognition, those were wonderful bonuses. But they weren't the real victory. The real victory was that I'd never doubted my choice, even when everyone else did. The real victory was that Mike had never stopped believing in his ideas, even when they were dismissed as hobbies. The real victory was that we had built a life based on what we believed was important, not what other people told us we should want. And now, finally, the rest of my family was beginning to understand that there are many different ways to be successful, that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who end up changing everything. Tomorrow, Mike would go back to his workshop. Not because he needed the money anymore, but because he loved the work. I would go back to my job, at least, until we figured out our next steps. And my family would have to figure out how to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by years of judgment and exclusion. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I felt like Sarah Rodriguez instead of Sarah. The family disappointment. And that feeling was worth more than any licensing deal could ever be.